As I sat after the prayer was over and we sing that song, There Is So Much Love, I didn't sing, I just listened. And as I just sat and I just listened to those words, I realized that there is so much love. And that's what we continue to course correct and come back to time and time and time again. It's the reason why we show up and we do what we do. As I was reflecting on our center this week, I got very nostalgic and started thinking about all the various centers that I've been privileged to see in my travels over the many years, and even all the way back to when I was studying as a student, back in, not North Hollywood, but Granada Hills, close to it. And I had this teacher, and she used to say this statement, and she said it because she loved it, but she actually had gotten it from her teacher. And so this has been crossed down, and I can't believe I've never shared this with you before, but it just came to me today, and she would say, if you were accused and held in jail for being a religious scientist, or for being a metaphysician, or one who professes to live a lifestyle based upon principles that teach that our thoughts create our reality, if you were accused and held in jail for being one of those, when you went to trial, would there be enough evidence to convict you? And I love that. Because what it does is it really drives home the point that eventually we have to get our nose out of the book. And we have to look at what it is that we've read and what we've absorbed in a class or from a talk or whatever it was that we got the information from, and we have to do our darndest, I'll clean it up today, our darndest to apply it and to understand that that's our responsibility. That's why we're here. And so if we are accused and held in jail for being one who professes to live a lifestyle based upon principles that teach our thoughts, create our reality, when you went to trial, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Emma Curtis Hopkins is one of our greatest teachers. In fact, she was, her last student was Ernest Holmes, the writer of Science of Mind. And Emma wrote this. She said, all of your affairs, as you now look at them, represent your former way of thinking. All of your affairs, as you now look at them, represent your former way of thinking, held together by the glue of your former ideas. Now, if you withdraw that glue, what can you expect but that your affairs will all fall to pieces to let the new affairs, representing your new way of thinking, establish themselves? And what I've come to discover is that removing the glue of our former thinking and reestablishing is not something that you do one time. In fact, I'll tell you, it's probably something that you do multiple times in one day. And so there is a dismantling and a rebuilding. There is a crucifixion and a resurrection. There is this constancy of change and flux that is giving you and I the opportunity to let go, to dissolve whatever patterns of belief that we have become accustomed to. It was so perfect that Jean would read what she read today about the idea that only because there is the belief that you will catch a cold from a draft will you catch the cold. It's not the wind. It's not the perspiration or moisture on your body. It's the belief. And she explained so beautifully about how that happens. And I was thinking about what is it that takes us, even the most well-seasoned of metaphysicians, what is it that stands in the way of that dismantling and letting it happen with ease and grace and the rebuilding coming up with strength? What is it that gets in the way? And I always think that it evolves down to two energy systems, and one is resistance and the other one is allowing. We are either in resistant mode, meaning that we are trying to keep something at bay, or we are in allowing mode, realizing that there's nothing external out there that can do anything to us unless, as Gene pointed out, we believe that it can. And you start to see, if you're willing, you start to see that that's not unreasonable. That's not very Pollyanna thinking, although I think Pollyanna got a bad rap. Because Pollyanna was probably the greatest metaphysician that ever lived, right? But it's understanding that that's actually truth. That's actually truth. And so we have to think about all of the information, all of the glue that has been a part of our structure up until now, that is all there, it's all crusted. It's kind of like the caulk in your shower that probably needs to be replaced right now. All of that stuff, it comes to us from old ideas, so old domestication that's been handed down. And we don't even realize that that's how most of our life is operated from, for information that we haven't even sat with ourselves individually and said, is this true for me? Is this valid? After I'm working on my book, and I'm a little nervous because my editor is here today. I won't embarrass her and let her know that I see her over there. But I'm working on my book, and so I'm revisiting a lot of stories from my past. And there's one about after my freshman year in university. I went to Oral Roberts University. Yes, I went to ORU. Carlton Pearson next week also went to ORU. We're colleagues, and I'm sure we'll tell you some stories. But after that first year, in order to try to keep paying my tuition, I signed up for these summer music ministry program teams, which meant basically I was in a band. And in this band, I was assigned a certain territory of the United States. And we did one-night stands for almost the entire summer in this territory of the United States, singing the praises of ORU and of God and luring unsuspecting teens to come there. So I was the biggest hypocrite that ever lived because I didn't want to be there. But after that was over, the mentor of this program, the leader of this program, was fired. His name was Jerry Florence. And I so admired him and his musical talents. And he looked at me and he was kind of upset that he got fired. And he said, let's go do something crazy. And I said, okay. And we had 2 weeks before school started. I had to be back for school. And so our crazy equated to driving down to Aransas Pass at the border, very bottom of Texas, Corpus Christi, and signing up on a charter to go deep sea fishing. And so we drove down there and we signed up for this charter. And that morning, long before the sun had arisen, we were on this boat and out we went. And it wasn't until the boat was very, very deep into the bowels of the Gulf of Mexico that I realized that this wasn't just a deep-sea fishing charter. This was like a professional charter for professional fishermen. This was like ESPN fishing, right? And neither of us had ever been before. And so we both kind of kept quiet and pretended like we knew what we were doing. But I was given my rod and I was given the bait and I cast it out. Now, anyone will tell you on your first cast, you never catch anything. Not true. On my first cast out, something bit my line almost immediately. And it was not just any little dinky bite. This was probably something sizable. You know, I was thinking of Jaws on the other end. But what happened was it took me around the boat 6 times. 6 times, starboard, meaning I had to go under the fishermen and over them and under, and my hands were gripping the pole so hard that the indentions were deep in my hands as we kept going around. And finally, on that 6th time around, several of them took pity on me and started to help me lure this thing. They didn't use a net. This was all by force, and after a lengthy struggle, I pulled in a 47-pound king mackerel out of the Gulf of Mexico. And I was shocked and stunned, and mostly my hands hurt. But as I remember that moment so vividly, because out of the mouth of one of those seasoned professional fishermen, he said, "Beginner's luck." Beginner's luck. And I thought about that a lot. Well, I thought about that mostly after I began this spiritual path. Because we don't subscribe to the idea of luck. To say that getting lucky or any of those kinds of things. Luck then implies that some external force outside of you has the capability of determining your good. And so there can be no such thing as luck. Everything is consciousness and awareness. So there's no reality to or substantiated idea to the idea of luck. And so what I began to see that as beginners allowing. Beginners allowing. Think about it. When you began to do something new in your world, you don't have the cynicism. I often tell you that you haven't developed that muscle of, oh, I'm not good enough. You show up with beginner's mind. And you begin to enter into that activity with a freshness, a possibility, because you have nothing to gauge it against. And so it's not abnormal for you to achieve some kind of success right off the bat because you haven't developed the idea of, I can't do this. Same thing when I went to New York. At 21, got off the Greyhound bus. I didn't know that you couldn't walk into casting directors' offices and agents and just say, hey, can I get an appointment? And I didn't know until I was told you can't do that. But by then, I had already booked some jobs. So, what are you going to do? And so you start to see that it is an energy of resistance or allowing. Resistance or allowing. And so when we start to understand that, we start to look at how that applies to us. How that the resistance so often is the glue that is established between what makes up who you are. And sometimes that glue has to be removed. And sometimes the institution of what you think you are has to be dissolved in order for something new to be able to grow. I was looking at a Wayne Dyer book, and he used this great turn of phrase. He says, it's like you're going from nowhere to now here. And all he did was he moved the W. You're going from nowhere to now here. And in the now here, you're beginning to understand what it means to make a new choice. A new choice. And here's what happens with new choices. A lot of times, it has to get so bad. You and I have to have the bottoming out. You and I have to have the ultimate sick and tired of being sick and tired before we will ever create what I call a fresh choice. What I see a lot of times, and you can ask any psychiatrist, any therapist, any minister, is that people will show up when they're in pain, and then they will get just enough to pacify the pain, just enough to make life tolerable, and then they will go back to the old modality and the ways of living. And then it'll get unbearable again. And then they will come back, and they will get just enough information. They will get just enough puffed up in order to survive a little bit more, and on and on and on this cycle goes. And what we realize is that that's not the way to live. We're not here to manage pain. There's a beautiful lyric in a song that says, you were not born to live. You were not born to survive. You were born to live. You're not here to survive. You're not here to manage pain. You're not here to manage at all. Because what you are is an expression of that which we call God, or which we use the term infinite intelligence or source. That's who you are. That's the truth of who we are. And I realize that I will never get most of you in a classroom. And so what I've done is I brought the classroom to you. Look under your chairs. And what you see is the basis of our entire teaching. How many times have I said that there's only one power, one presence, one God? And so what does that oneness mean? Well, even though this is a circle, and this circle has boundaries, obviously, that oneness that we talk about, the connectivity of all life, has no boundaries. But for the sake of a diagram, there has to be a boundary, all right? But what this circle represents is the oneness or the allness of that which we call God, intelligence, mind. In quantum physics, they talk about the field. So even though you're sitting now in this chair and you think you're separate, you're a separate carcass from the carcass next to you, right? You're still connected because it's not the body The body is just temporary, but what you are is your consciousness, consciousness within the body. And your consciousness is connected to the consciousness of the person next to you and the person next to you and the person next to you. Your consciousness is actually attributed and connected to every living thing. You're connected to the leaf on the tree, the grass out there. You cannot be separate. So in this field of allness, that's why in the scripture it says where two or more are gathered. What that's talking about is quantum physics, where you start to get minds together thinking on the same thing. Just as you create personally, you also create collectively, right? So the circle is the all, and we'll call it the one mind, because there's only one mind. Do you know that the mind of Albert Einstein is your mind? The mind of that, we'll take it even further, the mind of that which created worlds, created the universe, is your mind. It's just that you and I haven't accessed it to that degree. But you have the capability and the power because it is within you. It's not something that has to be earned. It's already inside of you. I can't stress enough how potent and how powerful you are and the potentiality that rests inside of you. So with the understanding then that this is one mind, then you get there's two aspects, not two minds, but two aspects to that one mind. The first one we call the objective mind, or some schools of thought call it conscious mind. And this is where you choose. And you choose all the time. You choose what you wore, you choose what you eat, you actually choose what mood you're in. You choose whether or not you hate these chairs, or you choose whether or not you're so enthralled by what I'm saying that you forget that you're sitting in the chair. You choose that. That's not my responsibility. You're actually choosing that. You're choosing whether or not you hate your job. You're choosing whether or not you want to hold a grudge against the family member. You're choosing whether or not you think you're poor. You're choosing whether or not you think you're too fat. You're choosing. Those are thoughts that you choose. No outside force is making you choose that. And so the power then that comes with understanding that life is choice. And here's the thing about choice. It's not choice, pause, 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 choice, pause. It's choice, 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 all day long for the rest of your life. I'm choosing to feel a little tired right now, right? But that's the canvas. See, you can look at it this way. That's the infinite canvas of choice that you have. And so what happens with that choice? Well, you see the little arrow. The arrow then goes to the subjective. That's, again, not a separate mind. That's another aspect of the one mind. And the subjective, what was the term you used, Gene? The receiver, the willing servant. That the subjective is the willing servant. In other words, all it does is it takes whatever you choose. If you choose that the world sucks and that everybody's out to get you, the subjective part of that mind goes, okay. And so then what happens is you can draw another arrow to form, and then you will start to create all kinds of evidence of how the world sucks and how everybody's out to get you. But it's not because that's what exists out there. It's that that's what you chose. So guess what? If you chose, I live in a world that works. But see, it's not a one-time choice. It's a lifestyle choice. It's what we call dwelling. The indwelling thought, the indwelling pattern of thought within you. You can't just say one affirmation and then expect my work is done here. This house is clean. It becomes a lifestyle choice. So you can't just say, the world supports me. I live in a friendly universe. The world has my back. Everywhere I go, I am supported, I am greeted, I am loved for what it is that I do. My work has value, and there is reciprocal action because that value is now brought back to me tenfold, multiplied abundantly. I don't just get to say that one time. I have to live that. That living, that constancy then goes into the subjective mind, and the subjective mind goes, great. Also, the subjective mind is the warehouse of all thought. Any thought that's ever been thought is in that portion of the mind. Any thoughts that Einstein had in there are there. That means that you have access to that. You can't just say, I'm not good enough. That's your choice. You are more than capable. But you have become so accustomed to that. And so then what we get out of those things is form. Now here's the thing. That fresh choice, you get sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so you make a choice. We call that, and I can see all my people in my class going, oh, okay. We call that first cause. And one of the phrases we often say in the science of mind is, you are first cause to your experience. You are first cause to your experience. You are responsible for the experience of your life. Think about the responsibility of that, but also think about the freedom of that. See, most of us don't hear that from a place of freedom. Most of us hear that from a place of injustice. But you've got to tweak that hearing. And you've got to realize, oh my God, if I'm responsible for the quality of my life, that means there's no limit to the quality of my life. But if I hear that I'm responsible for the quality of my life, then I can become indignant. And I can say, how dare you? And you get to continue believing that way. So when you make a fresh choice, that's called a first cause. But guess what? If you don't make a fresh choice, draw an arrow then from form up to objective. What does that mean? What does the arrow drawn from form to objective mean? It means that the choices that you are making, you're looking back at form, and that's where you're making your choice. You're looking at the conditions of the world, and that becomes how you begin to choose what it is that you believe. That becomes how you actively continue, same old, same old. That's the pattern, that's the habit of choice. And again, how do you break that cycle? How do you break that cycle? I want to tell you something. When you do that, when you just make your choices same old, you make them from form, you look at your checking account, the checking account says 0, and so you think that you don't have enough. How many times have you been there? And so you do that. You hear I got in touch with some of the relatives on my dad's side, people that I've never even known. And these conversations are all about how genetically malfunctioned we are. And this lineage on your grandmother's side has this abnormality, and this lineage on your grandpa's side has this abnormality. Oh yeah, cousin so-and-so has that. Right? And they've just accepted this as their truth. And so there's been no fresh choice to say, that doesn't have to be my reality. That doesn't have to be my reality. You go to the doctor, you've been told that you must obey and believe whatever the doctor tells you. That's what that is then. That's called a secondary cause. You live your life from secondary cause when you do not make a fresh choice, when you do not buck the system, when you do not go, wait a minute, if I'm infinite potentiality here, why am I having to accept something that somebody's told me? Do I have to accept that? Or can I make a fresh choice if I'm infinite potentiality? But man, it takes spiritual guts. It takes spiritual guts to practice making a fresh choice cause all the time and to live from that space. And do you realize that most people live their life from secondary cause? This is your life on paper. Everything that is created comes from this creative process. Every single thing. You are not an exception to this rule. If you want something better in your life, you can't expect it to come from another person or another thing. It starts with you. It starts with you. And so here's what I know. This is my job. My job is to teach you this. And I think how blessed I am because I love my job. The stuff in the middle of the week sucks. But this, I will take all that sucky stuff for the privilege to stand before you just for a little bit and try to give you something that's going to have some meaning and some depth and some traction to it. And so I want to publicly apologize to you for whatever upset that the community experienced last week in the town hall meeting. You see, I make decisions, and I try to make them as conscious as possible. And years ago, we made a conscious decision as we read this book that talked about when you work with your congregation and you groom them, particularly on things about finances, you always focus on the positive. And you focus on that, and you create the trajectory of that of infinite possibility, because the book was titled Not Your Parents' Offering Plate. Saying you can't do things, because church, whether you believe it or not, it's a nonprofit, it's a business, right? You've got to have money to run a business. And so you can't stand up there and speak doom and gloom, because people don't give to sinking ships. But what they do give is to a vision. And if you can maintain that vision, and if you can convince people of the vision, then you've got something there. And so the most beautiful part of this week was I got about a half a dozen emails from people who said, I've always been the one that said, I don't make any money, I don't have any money. I love you guys, but I don't have any money. And then they said, I got it. I got that what I've been doing is as I sit there, I look to my left and I look to my right and I go, they'll take care of it. And I began to take ownership of that. And I realized that by saying, I don't have money, guess what happens with this? The subjective mind just keeps picking that up, saying, oh, I don't have any money. And they said, so it's not a lot, but I'm willing to give something. And I said, yes, because you know what? It's not about the amount. Whether it's $5 or $10, it's not about the amount. What it is about that person then did what? They made a fresh choice about their ability. And do you see what happens with that fresh choice? There you have something to start with. But when you don't, when you just automatically go, oh, I can't do it. My friend Kyle Williams is running for the state of Georgia, senator. He's a state senator, and Kyle's a really good friend of mine, and I gave to his campaign, and he emails me every single day wanting money. And I love you, Kyle, but, I can't. But I don't make him wrong for doing that, because I know that that's what's needed. Marianne Williamson's a friend of mine. She's running in California. Same thing. I get emails from her every single day. Can you help? Can you send me this campaign? And I go, when I can, I will. I get it. But I don't make her wrong for doing that. And I start to see how when we make other people wrong, what we're doing is, it's not about them, it's about us. And it's about a belief that we have that somehow we don't have enough or we don't matter. And so that secondary cause thing is just being funded in so many different ways. And so when they said, it's not a lot, I go, it's not about the amount. It's the fact that once and for all, you made a decision to break the cycle. And what I realized then, what it came to me was, we've got people here who have very deep pockets. Thank you. And you can't create a vision on deep pockets. What you create a vision for is the middle. You ever hear of the Pareto principle? The Pareto principle, it's in Wikipedia, so you know it's got to be true. It says, it's also known, and I know you've heard this, it's also known as the 80-20 rule, the law of the vital few. See, there was this Italian man named Pareto who, in his research, realized that 80% of Italy was owned by 20% of the population. And so when he looked at that, he also then saw this dynamic played out in so many different areas, right? And so the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, states that for many events, roughly 80% of the effects come from 20% of the causes. And I would hear this often even in churches, where they'd say 20% of the population cover about 80% of the work fund 80% of the work. And that principle used to piss me off because I thought, that's secondary cause. Don't you see? We've all rolled over on our bellies and said, oh, it's the Pareto principle. We have no power of the Pareto principle. It's just a guy from Italy, okay? The power is creating that 50-50. When you can make the middle, don't you see the legacy and the vision is created by those of us in the middle. And when we can enroll the middle, and there can be ownership from every single person, then we've got something. And like I said before, I love my job. There are very few people in this world who get to stand before a collective of people and do what they can to lift you up. And so I don't take that lightly. I think long and hard, hours and hours and hours, about what I'm going to say to you, because that's a responsibility, and I'm up for the task. And I want you to know that I love you immensely. And in my mind, in my mind's eye, my vision, it's spectacular. It's spectacular what we are capable of doing. And all that I can do is invite you to join me. And so it is.